was the boogeyman.
As a matter of fact, it was.
Welcome back to our final episode covering Halloween. If you haven't seen our behind the scenes material, we suggest you go back to part 1. And if you haven't seen part 2, we suggest you do that. Otherwise, let's continue. When traveling to Haddonfield in the original screenplay, Loomis would arrive at a gas station at the halfway point where he would call his wife and then investigate the area to find a body. Some of these elements seemingly resemble what we saw in Halloween 4 years later. To save money, the gas station was cut to film Loomis finding the truck by a train track, and it was here he found the matchbook linking it with Michael. The scene we got was far more interesting and effective as we see Loomis heading towards the truck while an unstoppable train heads in the direction where Michael waits. The subtext can't be missed. Another thing to note is that when Loomis arrives at the graveyard, he is told about another killer in Russellville.
I remember over in Russellville, old Charlie Bowl, about 15 years ago.
Which is a small town just 20 minutes away from Bowling Green, which was another nod to John Carpenter's hometown. During the car drive with Laurie and Annie, you can hear John Carpenter's band, the Coupe de Villes, on the radio playing one of their songs. After the next cut, you will hear the Don't Fear song by Blue Oyster Cult. Now notice what happens when Laurie is dropped off. Michael watches her, but he doesn't get out of his car pursuing her. Instead, he follows Annie, his immediate target, and when she stops, he stops and exits the car to case her movement and the house. Laurie's friends were a prelude to Michael's grand design. Building up to Laurie, Linda and her boyfriend were just collateral happenstances in Michael's designs. Of all the characters in this film, Annie is the most reckless towards responsibility. Firstly, she mentions that Lindsay Wallace won't know what hit her after 6 hours of horror films, which is kind of morbid.
6 straight hours of horror movies. Little Lindsay Wallace won't know what hit her.
The result of Lindsay being dumped in front of horror films is...
scared.
And of course, Annie is not surprised in the least. The worst part of all this is that she dumps Lindsay on Laurie to get some hanky-panky. It's also pretty clear she has no problem allowing Linda and Bob to screw around in someone else's house while she is supposed to be caring for it. I don't think this is someone you would want to call if you needed someone dependable. This brings us to a great theme in this film. That is one of the reasons why this movie stands out back in 1978. If you notice, there are no locked doors. A girl can walk across the street half-clothed and not feel in danger. The local police feel comfortable and in control, stating,
Somebody broke into the hardware store, probably kids. I have the feeling that you're way off on this.
You have the wrong feeling.
It was a picture of the safest place in the world, suburbia, and although I can't stand it when characters enter a room and not turn on a light immediately, especially when they're looking for someone in a horror movie, I can understand why it was done in this movie, because it fit the time it came out. The framing of this movie is in a time when most towns felt safer, and we were complacent of spooky things in the night, even though we had holidays celebrating fright with spooky pumpkins that advertise for anyone dressed as a witch or ghoul to come to our house for candy, and make no mistake, these pumpkins would be present, foreboding death at every location Michael appears. And remember, these pumpkins were made by very similar knives that Michael uses to carve people with. It is all there. It's in your face. And yet, right in the center of this community is a monument reminding them of the evil in the world, and no one seems to acknowledge it, except kids and Laurie, who doesn't seem to fear it, but somewhere in the recesses of her awareness, she can sense danger. But what is that danger?
Calm down.
Well, Loomis understands that danger and tries to recall it for the sheriff when he talks about Michael's eyes.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face.
This line was specifically from Carpenter, who witnessed this while he was in a class at WKU and was sent to a mental facility where he witnessed a young boy.
It was like the creepiest thing I'd ever seen, just because as a stranger, he was completely insane.
Another thing to ponder about the scene between the sheriff and Loomis is this line.
I still think I should notify the radio and television.
No. If you do that, they'll see him on every street corner. They'll look for him in every house.
Had this call been made, a bulletin might have been put out over the movies the kids were watching, and perhaps lives could have been saved. It's a what-if scenario, but it does stand to reason that in Halloween 2, when the sheriff finds his daughter dead, perhaps this fostered his anger towards Loomis and himself for not making this call. When Lindsay Wallace is on the couch watching TV, there is a crew member visibly moving behind the couch. This is verified by crew testimonials. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment. And yes, the television is showing the glorious Thing from Another World. And yes, now that my John Carpenter series has been started, you can bet his version of the movie is guaranteed on its way for 2025. But first, we have some other things to cover. When the dog is killed, they achieve this by slowing down the footage to make it look like the dog stopped moving. When Annie dumps Lindsay on Laurie, it's time to discuss Ben Tramer. Laurie likes Tramer.
I'd rather go with Ben Tramer. Ben Tramer?
So, in Annie's impulsive and yet considerate gesture, she called Ben and set up the two to go to the dance together. But Laurie has cold feet. The reason why I mention this is because of this line and the aftermath.
I'd like you to call Ben Tramer and tell him that you were just fooling around.
I can't.
Yes, you can.
No, he went drinking with Mike Godfrey and he won't be back till late.
So Ben is out getting drunk during this movie, and Halloween 2, which happens immediately after, proposes that Ben Tramer is loaded when the cops and Loomis are chasing after him, and that is why he doesn't stop, as he's too tanked to know where he is. Ben is then killed by a ridiculous car crash, and that is the fate of Laurie's love interest. We thought we would just point this out to you if you didn't know it already. In the shooting script, a scene that was cut is when Annie's dad, Sheriff Brackett, would call her to check in on her. He would tell her to be careful, but of course she completely blows him off to go to the car and indulge herself in things she shouldn't this night. Thus, by not listening to her father, she's now dead. Now, we can assume that Annie has sex on her mind and therefore does not notice that the car is unlocked after it was locked just a second ago, and there's no way spare keys could have been at this location since it's not her home. One could even ask, how did Michael Myers get in the car if it was locked? Well, if he's the Shape, it's explained. If one believes he's strictly human, it doesn't make sense. So ponder that as we will cover Michael himself in a little bit. When Michael walks with Annie's body while Doyle is watching him, the body changes position between cuts. At first you can see her legs dangling to Michael's right side, and then with her head on the right side next. Look close, it's another blink and you'll miss it moment. Bob's line here is really poor taste.
Okay, first I rip your clothes off, then you rip my clothes off, then we rip Lindsay's clothes off. Yeah, I think I got it.
Yeah, that didn't age well. And I'm sure there are people ready to put trigger warnings on this film for such a line, but I can dismiss it easily if I see the character as a dumb teen with one thing on his mind. And as a result, his brain doesn't register how stupid he must sound and does sound. To piggyback more of my silly annoyance with Bob, I'm going to call him Quickfire for the rest of the movie, if you know what I mean about this scene. Which leads us into something that I love when Quickfire dies. That's really morbid. But when Bob is hanging against the wall and Michael stares at him like a curious dog, it is really strange, but filmed very cool. When Laurie looks at the kids in bed, I've always seen this scene as her last look at youth. because after the events she is about to witness, she will never be young at heart again and will completely embrace the reality of a harsh world. When Loomis spots the station wagon from the hospital, we know it hasn't been there too long, and I didn't really see this as a plot hole. I believe that after Annie was killed, Michael immediately moved his car. Why do I say this? Well, two reasons. The first is that the film visually shows us some things. The car was there when Lindsay was dropped off, but when Tommy looks out the window to see Michael carrying Annie, there is no car there. He certainly didn't move the car 3 blocks, then run back in time to kill Annie. Now, the film makes no qualms about the timeline here. From the moment Annie walks in Laurie's house to the moment she is dead, it's about 3 minutes of screen time, and the camera constantly follows every move Annie does. So there's no way Michael drove the car in that 3 minutes. So it had to be after he killed her and before Tommy looked out the window. Then there is the film's continuity to help us explain that Michael did in fact have time to do this. When Lindsay was dropped off, the thing was still playing. But when Tommy looks out the window, Forbidden Planet is playing and the ship is just landing on the planet. This does not happen till the 11-minute mark of that movie. This means when Tommy looks out the window, at least 20 minutes have passed since Lindsay arrived. You can come to this easily by concluding the conclusion of the thing, the commercials, and 11 minutes into Forbidden Planet. The point is, there was plenty of time for Michael to run the car over, race back, move Annie from the car into the house, while Tommy watched, and then the van arrived with Linda and her boyfriend. That's my take, but I could be easily wrong. However, I also want to state that if Michael is intelligent, which he seems to be, it is logical he moves his car. Annie made a lot of noise with her car horn as she died, so leaving and moving the car, then returning to make sure it didn't draw attention works. Whether or not that was his motivation, I can't say. This just goes to show you how good the continuity is in this movie and how detailed John Carpenter is in his films. The only question I would have is, how did Michael park this car by Loomis, who was apparently standing by the shrubs for some time, scaring kids away, talking to the police chief, and then finding the car? Maybe he had to take a leak or something, but that's pretty convenient. Now it's time we talk about Michael. I see him exactly as Carpenter describes him, a shape, like a physical entity with the ability of a ghost, seemingly able to travel spiritually. I say this because of this specific scene with Laurie. When Laurie goes over to Annie's across the street, she knocks on the front door. Then she goes to the back, where it is open, waiting for her. She then enters, goes upstairs. She sees the shrine Michael made for his sister, and then he is in the exact spot Laurie would end up. This suggests that when Laurie knocked on the front door, Michael went out back, leaving the door open for her. Once she was inside, he barred the back door and got back in through maybe a window or possibly the front door if he had the keys, which I doubt. Then he snuck upstairs and waited at the precise spot Laurie would try to collect her sanity without making a sound. This precise timing, or cosmic fate, is constantly around Michael, whether it's disappearing after a glance, to get into locked cars, or to even move around houses without creaking steps or making sound. If we believe that Michael is just a human, my suspension for disbelief with this movie would be completely shattered. But if I saw him as the shape that everyone behind the film contests, then I have zero problems believing his movements. However, you're going to have to make up your own mind as to what you personally believe Michael is. What I would say to any person that lumps Halloween into a typical slasher category that is just gore porn, I would say you are fundamentally wrong on all counts. If Halloween was typical of gore porn, where is the massive amounts of blood in this movie? Well, you won't find much. The audience imagines such things, and and therefore it is more psychological terror in nature. Sure, follow-ups didn't respect this trend, but we are talking about this particular movie, not the many copycats, which I honestly grew up enjoying after 1986, because I simply love films, and that included the horror genre. Now, if you look close, when Laurie is crouched by the couch, you can see a fan blowing the curtains. There are two theories that I'm not a big fan of in an attempt to explain Michael as a human. The first suggests he suffers from CIP, which basically means he is incapable of feeling pain, and that's why he doesn't respond normally when stabbed, shot, and so forth. Another states that because he is repetitive, compulsive, lacks empathy, obsessive, slow, and he doesn't speak, he must be autistic. Loomis never states a clinical diagnosis for this character in any movie. Assigning Michael human conditions to make him fit into a human construct doesn't work in my eyes. When Michael is unmasked, the actor you see is Tony Moran, who was the brother of Joni Cunningham, and he couldn't find much work. He was paid $250 for his short appearance. Originally, Loomis was to act surprised at Myers' disappearance, but Pleasant suggested he play it as if Loomis expected Michael to get away. They filmed it both ways, and in the end, Carpenter agreed with the actor. At the end of the film, the montage of the places Michael has been is just chilling, and it leans into the spiritual presence of Michael, as if he has made an imprint on these places forever, and his breathing lingers as we see them. Carpenter sums it up.
The ending means he's not only gone, he's everywhere.
During the credits of the movie, you can see the score was noted to be by the Bowling Green Philharmonic Orchestra, which was a joke because Carpenter did the music mainly himself with some help by fellow composer Dan Wyman. Now, there was an attempt to foster rumors out there that there was an alternate ending for Halloween. Apparently, there was a storage bin found with outtakes that somehow got away from the filmmakers, and it was purchased in an auction. Rumor has it there was a new end in the bin where Michael actually dies. However, we have to nip this rumor in the bud, as John Carpenter came out himself and posted this in response to that rumor. There is no different version of Halloween where Michael dies. This is total bullshit. So for those who wanted to hope this theory was possible, sorry to burst your hopes. When it came time for Halloween to go to TV, NBC bought the rights for the film for $3 million. The movie was too short, so Carpenter returned to filming a few new scenes since there wasn't any unused footage that would accommodate such a length. The movie would debut on October 1981. Halloween was an event for the horror genre. It really did transform horror for the next decade or two. Every other week, especially in the mid-'80s, there was a new low-budget horror film following in Halloween's footsteps. Some were copycats of Halloween, and others were very creative, like Nightmare on Elm Street or From Beyond. The over-the-top horror and campy styles to follow never quite matched Halloween, but I will give Nightmare on Elm Street and Child's Play some pretty good points on unique quality and concepts. Every studio wanted a Halloween film, and Carpenter was on record saying he said what he had to say about the first film, but the ugly side of success came calling, and it would not be the last in the sordid history of the Halloween franchise. Yablans wanted to make a sequel fast after he saw the receipts flowing in from Halloween and asked Carpenter to help. However, Carpenter wanted to do The Fog. There seemed to be a gentleman's agreement in place, and there was an understanding. I said, sure, let's do Fog. We'll do Fog first, then we'll talk Halloween too, and we agreed to do that. However, before Carpenter signed on the dotted line to make the film with Yablans, Carpenter teamed up with Bob Raimi, who was now head of Avco Embassy Films. When Yablans heard that he was basically stiffed by Carpenter on The Fog, he went bonkers. I was pretty upset. I was livid. I called Carpenter, and I got nowhere with him, and I did the only thing I could do at that point. I sued them both. In the end, the case was settled. Yablans let Carpenter make his film The Fog with another producer and released any claim to that project in exchange for Carpenter to work on Halloween 2. Carpenter noted he hated writing the script with Deborah and stated Budweiser got him through the project. Regardless, the sequel came out and it did a fair $25 million at the box office. Carpenter and Hill was pressed to continue with Halloween, but they wanted to be separate from Michael Myers, and to keep the stellar team, Yablans and Akkad agreed, and the end result was a movie completely outside of what audiences expected. And this was Halloween 3: Season of the Witch, which made $14.4 million, thus sinking the brand further. Everyone knew the final product was a misstep after it released, even though it was entertaining nonetheless. The next project for Halloween was to be a ghost-like story, but Mustafa Akkad demanded it be the continuation of Michael Myers. Carpenter and Hill, frustrated, decided to sell their interest in Halloween to Akkad, and now he had majority ownership of the Halloween series. The result would be the Thorn trilogy, consisting of Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, and Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. At first it seemed they were on the right track, as Halloween 4 had an amazing actress and the unbelievable return of Dr. Loomis. But the film worked, and at the end, you wanted to know where it went. The film made a little above 3, making $17.8 million. The Revenge of Michael Myers was the weakest revenge to date, as it only made $11.6 million, the lowest to date of the franchise, and the film killed main characters from the fourth movie instantly, and then fell into tropes that copycats the first Halloween. Finally, Halloween 6 showed a real greed of the filmmakers when they totally disrespected actress Danielle Harris, who not only put her heart and dedication into the franchise to the point that she used her own money to gain emancipation from her parents because the studio didn't want to hire a 17-year-old to play an 18-year-old because of labor laws. After the thousands she spent on being emancipated, she was offered a pathetic $1,000 to play the lead, and her character was to be completely disrespected in the worst ways possible for the sixth film. The end result of this money-grubbing production was a disaster of epic proportions, where a cult controls Michael, and in the stupid producer's cut, Michael has a biological son with a character we rooted for, and Paul Rudd was trying to perform as Tommy Doyle badly. The whole film was a crash course on how to destroy an epic villain. With such a mess, there was only one thing to do: delete the last 3 films and make a reboot called H2O, which was a great success of $75 million. It would be followed by Halloween 8 Resurrection, which had one of the dumbest retcons you've seen in movies for a while. I won't even describe it. What's worse was that this movie not only was a dumb slasher film, but it was made in honor of campy reality television. Yeah, avoid it, really. Anyways, it made $37.6 million, and once again, the only way to recover from this film mess was to reboot it, and they did so with a vengeance, with Rob Zombie's version of both Halloween and a Halloween 2, with Malcolm McDowell as Dr. Loomis, and a new Laurie, and a new sheriff, and who cares? What's embarrassing about this remake is they turned Michael into trailer trash, and his entire family was trailer trash. Thus, he's more a victim, and that's the reason why he killed people, which totally destroys the mystique of the first film, where Michael is raised by a normal family and for reasons we do not understand, he kills his sister. Why on earth would they make this decision? At the start, the first film made $80 million, but you could see the fall when the second movie made $39 million. But guess what? After that, they rebooted the franchise again, ignoring every film since 1981's Halloween 2 with Halloween. Then Halloween Kills, and finally, Halloween Ends. As for me, I didn't really discover Halloween until around 1988. When I was young, aliens scared the crap out of me, so I avoided horror films like The Plague for several years. It wasn't until I met a friend named Kurt at a low-income apartment complex called Burnport in Toledo, Ohio. Kurt loved horror films, and his mother would constantly take him to the Sundance Kid Drive-In at Oregon, Ohio. And because he was my friend, I went along at times. We would see stuff like From Beyond, Return of the Living Dead, Life Force, and Critters, to name a few. I discovered that nothing scared me after Alien except John Carpenter's The Thing. By 1988, I never missed a film, whether I wanted to see it or not, and that included Halloween, which never was on my radar. I saw Halloween 4 in theaters, like 5, but I wasn't that into it. I just saw it as Friday the 13th, and I preferred Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street way more. It wasn't until several years later that I would go back to look at Halloween because I was a big Carpenter fan, and I wanted to watch every movie he ever made. Though Halloween is not in my top 5 films made by Carpenter, it is definitely a very well-crafted movie. While I spent a month researching this film, I really appreciated it more, and I see how it stands out so much from other films that followed it, whether it was sequels or copycat movies. It is a great movie, but I still regard other Carpenter films over this one due to my own bias and nostalgia. Plus, there are just some awesome films in Carpenter's arsenal, and we will continue to explore his work in the future. The Halloween franchise had a huge legacy, but unfortunately, it's just been mismanaged too many times. Although I like several of the films beyond the first 2 movies, none of them matches the sincere vision of the first one, and fewer of them respect the character of Michael Myers. I enjoy the franchise very much, but some of the missteps were so severe that it damages enjoyment of other films. For instance, you can't watch Halloween 4, which is pretty good, without knowing what happens to the main character in 6, and it's hard to watch after you know. H2O was literally canceled by Halloween 2018, and that's a shame, because it was a great movie. They just didn't learn from past mistakes. Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and even Child's Play showed way more respect and discipline in their follow-up films, barring the modern dumb remakes of an uninspired Hollywood today. And the only explanation for the muddled consistency of Halloween is greed and a lack of vision. With all that said, you may or may not be asking, is it possible I might do Halloween 2? Well, first I'll see what you folks say, and then we'll see, as I have lots of films to cover. For now, let's wrap up this one and gear up for Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which I will release tomorrow. So relax and listen to some tunes for a day, and we'll see you then.
I'll just whistle a happy tune.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Use super thanks. It helps.